You've probably already heard the term living books, but what does it mean? And do you already have some on your bookshelf? I'm Jenny, and I am a self-proclaimed book lover. But you do not need to be a book person to appreciate living books and use them in your homeschool. So what are living books? Let's tackle that question first. So every single person is going to have their own kind of personal definition for living books. But I think we can all agree that living books are quality classic literature that have at least some academic or moral value. So these don't necessarily have to be academic textbook type things. They can be fiction, just as long as you do feel like they encourage good morals. And I'll get to some examples of really standard living books that most people who enjoy using living books would have on their bookshelves. But first, I do want to mention an example that is a little contentious in the book community. Harry Potter is obviously a series that everyone knows. Many people love it. But there is some debate about whether the Harry Potter books are living books or not. I personally find the Harry Potter books extremely moving, extremely profound. I grew up with them, and even reading them as an adult, it's like they hit me harder than they ever did. So I would consider them living books, but I do see the argument that they aren't quite quality enough to be classified as living books. So I can see both sides, I definitely get it, but I think the thing that Harry Potter has working against it the most is the fact that it's so modern and so contemporary. It came out only, within my lifetime. So maybe in 50 years they will be considered living books by everyone. Okay, so now I want to get into some examples of what are living books? I want to start out with some that are a little more academic at first. So some that come to mind are Our Island Story. This is the history book that my girls and I use for history in our homeschool. It's really great. It's a history of England for boys and girls. There's also the Burgess Animal Book for children. It's not really science-y, like with technical terms, but they're just little stories that have different animals, and you kind of do learn about these different kinds of animals and how they interact in nature. There's something like Tales from Shakespeare or Beautiful Stories from Shakespeare, which these are retellings of Shakespeare plays, but these are meant for children to introduce these concepts from Shakespeare to even younger audiences. And then for science, there's something like Handbook for Nature Study, which is a really in-depth, really cool book that just gives you so many different facts about nature that you would maybe wonder if you were out in nature doing nature study with your kids. So as far as literature goes, there are so many examples I could come up with. I mean, basically my entire bookshelf at home is just all living books, but I'll list some of mine and my kids' favorites now. We love The Secret Garden. We love the Little Bear series. We love the Frog and Toad series. These are all ones that I'm kind of recommending for younger kids, like my kids. My oldest daughter is almost 8. But there are other ones too, like anything by Jane Austen is really great. I particularly recommend Pride and Prejudice and Emma. I think those are must-reads for any person. I don't care if it's a boy or a girl or a child or a teenager. I think that these stories are just so universal. I also recommend series like the Chronicles of Narnia and the Lord of the Rings series, and including The Hobbit, which precedes the Lord of the Rings series. These are great books that you can do as read-alouds, or these are great books to be able to trust to let your kids read independently. I'll make sure to leave links to all these books that I'm listing below in the description, and a lot of them are actually printed by our friends at Living Book Press. So those are extremely high quality printings of these books. I highly recommend buying from Living Book Press. You cannot beat the quality. So I will leave those links down below. So now that you might have a better idea as to what living books are, what some examples of living books are, you might be wondering, how can I use these in my homeschool? Well, the answer is you can really get involved with living books as much or as little as you want to. Some people just use them kind of as inspiration for read-alouds, so trying to come up with a good list of read-alouds that they can do with their kids that they know are high quality and appropriate. And other people take the idea of living books and kind of run with it and create their entire homeschool method and curriculum around it. For example, the Charlotte Mason method basically revolves around the concept of living books, which is one reason why I love the Charlotte Mason method, because I think that books are just the cornerstone of a good education, and good books, that is. So Charlotte Mason uses living books to teach kids basically all subjects, which I think is really great. And if you want to go deeper into the Charlotte Mason method, there is a great online curriculum called Ambleside Online, which consists of a massive book list of all living books and a reading schedule so that you can either assign to your kids different readings to do within a certain period of time or do the read alouds together as a family with all these really rich living books. So I highly recommend checking that out if you're at all interested in using living books in your homeschool. Even if you don't end up using the Charlotte Mason method to a T or even using the Ambleside Online curriculum to a T, just go ahead and go on Ambleside Online and check out the incredible book list that they have created. They even show which grade in Ambleside Online they introduce these books, so you get an idea as to when books might be appropriate for different ages of children. And one thing I want to add about Ambleside Online is they do encourage the use of free domain books as much as possible. So a lot of the books on their website that are listed are available for free if you're able to print them out. So that's one thing to consider. You can save money even having to use all of these old living books. So I feel like at this point in this video, you might be like, okay, I'm interested in using living books. I'm on board. This sounds great. But it seems like it might be a little bit of a burden to get your hands on a lot of these living books, or it might be a bit of a burden to kind of do something a little bit against the grain, because these are not typical curriculum textbooks that you will see a lot of people using in their homeschools. So why use living books? Well, one response I have to that question is you can trust the quality of living books. They have stood the test of time. These are books that their messages are universal. So you know that over the generations of people that have read these books, something about them has resonated with the audience. So I encourage you to check out living books even just for that reason, because these are in the zeitgeist. These are the books that have shaped our culture. Living books also tend to encourage good morals and good values. So if this is something important to you, you're teaching virtues in your homeschool, anything like that, then that's another reason. These living books really are timeless, and it is a really cool feeling to connect with a book or a story that was written generations and decades before we were even born. As I mentioned before, I do highly recommend checking out the Living Book Press website, which I will link to below. The founder, Anthony Cofield, does an amazing job on these printings. They are unabridged, which is really hard to find. When you start looking into living books, you'll find all sorts of abridged copies. All of Living Book Presses are unabridged, which is great. They have beautiful illustrations, beautiful covers. They are such high quality, and they're a really good size. Sometimes another thing that you'll run into with living books, if you find them on Amazon or something, is they're a super weird size. They must be cheaper to print that way or something. But on Living Book Press, I just love the way that he does their books. We actually did a podcast episode with Anthony Cofield from Living Book Press, so be sure to check that out. That was a really great conversation about his favorite living books, his definition of living books, and I just loved talking to a fellow book lover. And also, I do want to recommend that you check out my video on Ambleside Online, because I kind of share my thoughts on how I use the online Charlotte Mason curriculum that they have there, and how I use the book list and the schedule and all that. So go ahead and check that out too. See you next time, and happy homeschooling!